Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for virtually attending our first speaker series of the year tonight, Staying Connected in a Disconnected World. My name is Alicia Deluga, and I'm the Program and Marketing Manager for the Sasaki Foundation. Also with me tonight is Alexandra Lee and Anna Sherling from the Foundation, as well as Foundation board members Marianne Ocampo, Tao Zhang, and John Sincala. Tonight, we will hear from Nigel Jacob of the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, Alex McCrae from Philanthropy Mass, Kate Mccloud from Mass TLC, and Caitlin Claussen from Sasaki. We hope this conversation tonight will provide well-rounded insight as to how to stay connected and grounded during this ongoing pandemic, and how we can play a part in keeping the many communities we belong to stronger than ever. So just a few housekeeping items. Throughout the discussion, please send any questions you may have for panelists using the chat function, and I'll gather your questions at the end and share them with our panelists when it's time for audience Q&A. Also, this evening's conversation will be recorded, so it will be available for those who are not able to attend. And the recording will be on our events page on our website, and you can find recordings from previous events there as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Caitlin, our moderator, who will kick us off this evening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alicia. Hi, everybody. I'm Caitlin Claussen. I'm a campus planning principal at Sasaki, and I also serve on Sasaki's board as an at-large board member. Delighted to have everybody here this evening. I'm going to start just with some introductions to introduce our guests, and then we'll transition into moderated kind of panel discussion. So we'll start with Nigel Jacob. So Nigel is the founder of the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, a civic innovation incubator and R&D lab within Boston City Hall. Nigel's work is about making urban life better through innovative, people-oriented applications of technology and design. Prior to joining the city of Boston in 2006, Nigel worked in a series of technology startups in the Boston area. So welcome, Nigel. Thank you for joining us today. We're also joined by Alex McCrae. Alex joined Philanthropy Massachusetts as the Senior Director of Programs in August of 2017. With a career in the nonprofit sector that spans 25 years, most recently, Alex served in a resource development capacity at both the United Way of Greater Plymouth County and the United Way of Rhode Island. Prior to his work within that network, Alex was a Senior Associate at Nonprofit Finance Fund, helping to strengthen nonprofits and enabling social sector leaders to make sound strategic decisions. In addition to raising funds and consulting, Alex has held program management and marketing roles within youth, workforce development, and arts-focused nonprofits. Welcome, Alex. And we're also joined by Kate Mccloud. Kate is a Vice President at Mass TLC, one of the largest technology associations in the region, whose mission is to accelerate growth, innovation, and the development of an inclusive tech ecosystem within Massachusetts. She's been at Mass TLC for 4 years and is involved in business and finance operations, as well as membership and marketing programs. Before Mass TLC, Kate was involved in the startup ecosystem on the ground, working at the Grommet. So welcome, Kate, and welcome to all of our guests this evening. So, as Alicia alluded to, the focus for tonight's conversation is about staying connected in a disconnected world, and it's exactly what we are doing here this evening. We're staying connected to one another. We are all virtual, but in fact, I am actually located right now in the incubator, and I know that if we were having this this event in person, this is where we would be. So I feel like we are here in spirit in Sasaki's incubator. Today we're going to span just a variety of different questions, and we're also kind of at the year-long mark since the pandemic started. So it's been 12 months to experience different ways of connecting with one another, but it's also provided time to reflect upon what has worked well. So the first question, we're a year into the pandemic, reflecting upon your experiences to date, what has worked well in terms of engaging and connecting with your communities, and what hasn't worked well? Do you have any lessons learned that you'd like to share? Alex, would you care to kind of kick us off with any of your reflections?
Sure, Caitlin, and thanks for the opportunity to just share my experience and sort of channeling other experiences through members of my team at Philanthropy Massachusetts. So thank you for that introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here. Great question, right? I mean, we're coming up on a year of a pandemic, and how do we keep engaged and focused and help our those who we work with. And in my case, at Philanthropy Massachusetts, it's funders, nonprofits, and as well as funder networks. And so we've seen a surge in our demand for programs and services. So whereas in a typical year, we host and convene across all three of those strands of business, if you will, about 80 or so programs and events. And in 2020, we increased that by about 50%. People wanted to come together. And even though it's in this sort of, square box Zoom moment, people still wanted to connect. And so we provided lots of opportunities for folks to learn and exchange ideas and to also act. Through a variety of different ways, but I'll pause there in terms of what worked well is just people connecting with each other across all three strands of business, really.
And in terms of connecting, again, has it all occurred digitally and virtually, or have you maintained any element of face-to-face in this new reality?
Yeah, none. So really none. It's been 100% virtual. I went into my office downtown Boston today, and I'm one of 3 people out of 10 who even do that. On occasion, I run into a colleague, but usually I'm alone in my office doing what I used to do. That helps me to stay sane, quite frankly. And I recognize that that's a privilege that I have to kind of get in my car and drive to my office safely and do that. So yeah, 100% virtual.
Kate, how about for you? You work within the tech space. So in some ways, one might think that this is a space that is really familiar. You perhaps were leveraging some of these tools even pre-pandemic. What have been some of your experiences, both favorable and really, really positive? And so what has worked well, and what have been some of those challenging points for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love how you phrased it, because you're right. We knew about all of those tools, but were we super comfortable with them at the beginning? I would say not, right? Like most of us, we had the ability to work from home. We all kind of practiced it, but we weren't expert at the Zoom meetings before we were, forced to be all on Zoom all the time, or whatever platform we were on. We also love Log Me In and GoToMeeting and others that we learned through the process. And so that actually is what I think worked very well for us, was that we were varying our offerings and and learning new things as we went. So we were early to try Hopin, which is another online platform, but it has this really cool chat function, networking function in the back end, where you can set the timing and still kind of create those bumps and meet people that you wouldn't have met before. And we ran a program last summer where we let people we called it Summer Connect, and people could come and share other things. And so one of our members and partners ran a Kahoot game. And so there we were playing Kahoot, trash talking in the Slack channels, right? So we were finding new ways to connect as a team and with our members that I think, and so that was one of the things that really worked well, was sort of mixing it up a little bit, but also meeting members and our partners where they were, right? They, like yours, Alex, wanted to get together. They wanted to connect. They wanted to share and just sort of have those safe spaces to let out their feelings and share with other people who got it. So those were some of the wins. I think there were some things we tried that didn't work, some technology tools. Even this week, we tried something new that kind of didn't quite go the way we planned. So there's still learning and growing to be had with some of the things that we've tried.
Nigel, how about you and your experience? What were you doing kind of pre-pandemic, and how did that evolve as you entered into the pandemic? And again, taking a look at wins and successes and some of the challenging areas.
Well, certainly the city of Boston has always been very multi-channel. I think we generally have been strongest when we're face-to-face, but obviously that's not an option anymore. So we've had to retool there. One of the interesting sort of happenings over the last year has been the use of our 311 app. And so Boston has a 3-on-1 app. We were actually the first. You see something that's broken in the city and you snap a photo and you send it to us, and we come out and fix it. And so we saw going into the summer of last year, and there was a lot happening last summer, obviously, that we began to pay a lot of attention to how people were using that channel. And so we were beginning to see people make requests for food, right? There was this moment last year where people were food insecure and they needed food. And so we adapted to that, and we said, since they were sending in these requests through 311, we realized we should optimize around that. And so we created a chat line for people that needed food delivered. And so that became a very popular service where we were getting, hundreds of requests in weekly for people that needed food delivered. And so at first we tried a few different experiments with food delivery. We worked with the MBTA, but the one that people liked the most was when we actually had city employees, for the most part, going out on bikes and hand delivering the food, staying 6 feet away and sort of putting it on the ground and so on. And that essentially was like a multi-channel moment of engagement, where we were starting with an online experience where they were calling in or they were using 311, and wrapping up the experience with an in-person moment. So I think that's always been part of the job, sort of using as many channels as we have available to fulfill needs and desires.
Nigel, just reflecting upon that comment, I think one of the things that it also just starts to highlight is the way in which there is kind of this kind of implicit inequity that also gets built into these virtual environments in terms of who has access to technology, who has access to a computer, who has access to internet. And so just wanting to reflect upon that a little bit more, this virtual environment is terrific, but we also recognize that there are real limits to it. And from your experiences, what do you consider to be some of the greatest kind of engagement gaps that still exist and need to be addressed, where we can start to kind of pivot and start to focus our priorities on addressing?
Yeah, there's a lot of gaps. I think, in particular last year, we were focused on people who are at risk, right? So people, the homeless, obviously, they were near the top of our list, right? People who literally do not have infrastructure to do any of the things that we're supposed to be doing in this moment. We were really concerned with older adults, who may be shut-ins in this moment, who in normal times may struggle to get out and about. But now, obviously, maybe not obviously, but there was a lot of those older adults that were struggling to use the technology, and so there was a whole set of needs there. And obviously then school-age kids, it was a challenge, right? There was, because obviously kids, in some ways, not to say they suffer the most, but a lot of times they suffer in a compounded way, right? So if their parents are out of work, or they're housing insecure or food insecure, and the kid has to go to school every day, that's tough. And so we saw a lot of families without technology, or without access or high-speed access to the internet, or sometimes just without a place in the home to get on Zoom to go to class. And so there's a whole set of issues that have always been there, and that they've been exacerbated now, based on race often, and sort of lack of access to services and so on. So there's a whole set of issues there that
and I think that's a problem that compounds, right? So you've got these students who can't get on, so the parents are trying to homeschool, but they're also trying to work, and then they can't really work, and and so it's just this escalating, scaling horror.
That's for sure. That's exactly right. It does compound. And so, inability to do one thing leads to an inability to do another, and so on, right? An adult who loses their job because of COVID now can't afford access to the internet at home, so now their kid can't get online to go to school. Yeah, there's a whole set of tricky issues here.
And for many of those individuals too, when they're relying upon maybe internet access at public spaces like libraries, where now just because of COVID, you can't gather and congregate in that way.
That's for sure. And
Hey,
so
yeah.
yeah, I mean, so the people have been trying to drive, next to their schools so they can get online from in their car or from, to the library, same kind of thing. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Kate, I'm really curious to hear if, in your experience working with the kind of association and members that you work within the technology sphere, have you come across any interesting innovations with any of those firms in terms of trying to innovate around providing greater access to start to bridge this equity gap?
Yeah, I think everybody approaches it from their own sort of expertise and specialty. We ran a program in the fall called the Tech Top 50 and pulled out a lot of these stories to understand how our companies were offering COVID response, how they were offering innovation and community. So, Verizon is one who invested over $7 million in Massachusetts small businesses. Salesforce is another. They created an accessibility support team dedicated to supporting companies to build accessible environments on their platform. LogMeIn with their GoToMeeting platform offered that free of charge for hospitals, cities, government, schools, nonprofits for a time. And then there were things, and Nigel, you sort of touched on this, like Ava Robotics, who worked with MIT CSAIL and the Greater Boston Food Bank to create a telepresence robot that could help them get fewer humans into the food bank itself so that they could make sure that the warehouse was clean, make sure that the people were safe, make sure that they could distribute this food. There are so many of these stories.
I'll also just say, just within the sort of philanthropic space, funders who were traditionally funding in certain arenas or spaces almost had no choice, right? Going to the food, insecurity that Nigel had referenced, and homelessness, and a range of other kind of really basic issues shifted and allowed their support to be converted, right, to this unrestricted, at least for 2020, we'll see whether that sticks. But because of the dire compounded long-term effects of the pandemic, funders really pivoted, right? They pivoted and they adapted, just like nonprofits. Nonprofits, right, got really creative, had to, in order to stay in business, in order to continue to serve the youth and families that they were serving. There was no choice, really, which is interesting, right? Because it forced philanthropy to kind of do things that folks have been calling on the field to do for quite some time.
I feel like for us, it was like one of those things that was like, okay, well, we meant to do this. So now we have to do this. So go. And so that was a silver lining for sure.
Yeah.
Alex, I wanted just to kind of build upon your comment a little bit more, just to talk again about how philanthropic organizations have been shifting their priorities, but also how you've perhaps, modified program development during the pandemic in response to this. And again, thinking about, the different ways that you're engaging, whether it's the funders or the nonprofits that you're working with.
Sure, thanks, Caitlin. That's a great question. I mean, we, as a membership organization, we have a pretty diverse range of constituents, right? So a family foundation is different than a corporate foundation. I mean, it's just a different set of issues, their boards, the way they operate in a lot of ways, the way they think in some ways, the way they make decisions, all of that. So from our perspective, we do a whole lot of, as you can imagine, a whole lot of partnering and sort of meeting the needs of the funder and the nonprofit where they are, right? Especially when it comes to, say, equity. Like, not everybody's in the same place with regard to understanding structural racism, right? Like, or what have you. And so what we did a lot of is just adapting programs, having varied elements to our programs, giving people, allowing people to have safe, open spaces where they felt comfortable to talk about issues and different things. We convene and support a number of different funder networks based on role, based on issue area, based on geography. They're all different, at least a dozen or so of them. And so they all each have their unique sort of characteristics. Some have steering committees and working groups. I mean, you know, they are moving certain pieces of their work along, and we just help to sort of highlight, elevate, support, you know, lead when we can, but really just shining the light on, oh wait, inequities existed forever. What's the action to try to correct some of the really wrongs, right? So.
I'm curious just to hear from this group around any best practices, you know, that you have arrived at around engaging the variety of different communities that you engage with, whether it's, you know, one-on-one engagement versus, you know, smaller focus groups versus larger audiences, knowing that there are, I think, you know, we've kind of discovered, or in my experience, I feel like, you know, the sweet spot for a focus group seems to be about 6 people on Zoom. And then, you know, beyond that, it starts to get a little bit more challenging. But would love to hear from everybody just around, you know, what you consider to be some of your best practices now.
You know, one of the things, I don't know if I would call it best practice, but it's a developing practice that has a lot of promise, are mutual aid networks. You know, so almost in every city that I can think of, and I've talked to a bunch of my colleagues in other cities, the mutual aid has always been a concept in the background, and some cities do sort of make more use of their mutual aid networks than others. But in this moment where government is often failing because it's not able to pivot adequately, or it's running out of money in some instances, mutual aid networks are often picking up the slack or trying to. And I think the challenge there is really trying to figure out, how do you interleave a mutual aid network with the services that government delivers. So I think trying to figure out what a more distributed model of local governance, how that could and should work, is, I think, a good question for looking at the future of mutual aid networks, especially now.
Any reactions, Kate?
No, I was going to approach the question really differently. I admire everything Nigel said there, and I agree completely. I think for Mass TLC, we've come along with some best practices here that are sort of that more operational and programmatic approach. Like, we really want to meet people where they are. We want to be authentic with them. We want to, you know, show up as ourselves. We let people into our homes now every day. We see our pets, our partners, our children, maybe not in that order. And so I think we've learned too with our members that offering asynchronous opportunities to connect and engage, and in different formats. So maybe it's a Zoom meeting or a GoToMeeting, but maybe we record it so that someone can listen to it on a walk later, or not have to watch the whole thing, right? Because so much of it is content. We've also shortened things. So in the before times when we would have a meeting, there'd be a lot of time for networking and snacking and grabbing the coffee, and we miss that. But now it feels like you can tighten the timeline a little bit and give people more of that time off camera too. So those are some of the best practices we've been playing with, just around, you know, sort of the operations of how do we live our lives on camera and find that balance in our work and our personal lives, because I think it's harder.
How about you, Alex?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to start how Nigel started. I don't know if these are best practices, but they're evolving practices, right? So I'll speak internal organization, you know, small team of 10 people, and externally. So internally, not seeing each other in person, right? We've gone to Slack, for example. Like, we didn't communicate via Slack, and yet now there are a bunch of channels. We're communicating with each other. I think our organizational culture is getting stronger in some ways in this virtual way, right? I wouldn't have necessarily anticipated it, but I do think we're a little bit more explicit about our time together and clear about, let's have a virtual happy hour. Let's, you know, put out a emerging trend and article on Slack and talk about it, right? So that's internal org culture piece. Externally, again, it's just been a variety of things. We use breakout rooms a lot. You know, and anyone who's participated in our program, we're all about breakout rooms, because that's where the real, you know, a lot of the kind of on, engagement at that sort of individual level happens, especially when we've had crowds of 100, 200, 250 people. It's harder for folks to necessarily speak up and for a lot to kind of happen in that kind of environment, which is what we've kind of seen. So we use breakout rooms a lot, but we alternate that with panel discussions and interviews and, annotate and chatting and Google Docs and all these different things to keep people engaged.
And what's interesting, Alex, just reflecting upon that comment again, it's breaking down the scale, it's providing more intimate environments for conversation, and again, taking that down to the one-on-one conversation. I would imagine with all of the communities that you're serving, you're really trying to build trust with the communities with whom you engage, and communication is built on the foundation of trust. And so pose another question, which is, how do you go about building trust in this time, leveraging the different types of engagement techniques that we have available to us? I don't know if anybody would like to volunteer to go first.
I'll try that one. I mean, I think I started it too with thinking about showing up as yourself, being honest about, where you are, asking the question, how are you? And then following it up when they say I'm fine with, how are you really? I'm surprised by how often I've done that and gotten more than I expected and felt kind of good about it, that someone was needed someone to talk to, and I was there. And I think building trust is about that. I mean, Mass TLC is a small team, there's 10 of us, and we are generally interested and engaged and invested in our members. And so one of the things that we did early in the pandemic was to do a round of check-in calls, a voice of the customer survey with our members that had us, and we've maintained this, had us kind of calling, reaching out, asking those questions that are not about the business so much as they are about just kind of trying to reach people who might not feel connected.
Yeah. Nigel, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I like that one from Kate. I think in this moment, finding moments, like human moments. And so when you think about government as an institution, but I think it really scales to any institution, the issue of power and vulnerability is always on the table. And so oftentimes when government comes into a room, whether it be virtual or physical, there's always, right, I'm not saying necessarily I do this, but there's often a sense that, that we have the control, right? And I think that when you can sort of turn the tables there and find moments to be vulnerable and say, and so one of the ways that sort of having the power manifests itself is that you also have to have all the answers. And so sometimes people don't know. And I think that's always been the case, but I think now more than ever, finding ways to be vulnerable and saying, we don't know. We're trying, and these are the kinds of things that we're trying, but we actually don't know the right way to do this. And so being honest about those things, I think now more than, we should always have been doing that, but I think now more than ever, when we can, just be good humans, I think it goes some way to at least, that doesn't, right, it's just a conversation, so it may or may not build trust, but I think it does create the context for a more trustful relationship.
Yes, love that, the human moments.
Exactly. Alex, any thoughts?
Yeah, and I wanted to piggyback on both what Kate and Nigel just said, so I was putting a few things in the chat. Sometimes doing that at the same time of listening is a challenge, but at any rate.
Other multiple ways to engage.
Right. There's no question. I think this whole thing around power and trust and vulnerability and opening up and, saying you don't know something is a challenge for the philanthropic sector, right? It's, that's a challenge. Perhaps things are changing. Again, we'll see if the momentum, I think, that has been built around funders and nonprofits coming together and really trying to understand each other a bit more works. We did a survey back in September, and the number one issue that funders said that they believe or anticipate remaining beyond 2021 are the relationships with their grantees and nonprofit partners. That was number one. That 80% or so said, that's what we think is going to stick around and have longevity. Other things, less so, but strengthened relationships and the communication and the candor and the frequency with which folks are communicating perhaps a little bit more. That's what they believe will stick around.
Yeah. There's a certain level of kind of the unveiling on Zoom. You know, you get insights into individuals' lives. You get a sneak peek of what's going on in the background. There is this essence of humanity that is kind of exposed within this environment. That it's in that way. It's also that is part of vulnerability as well, which you know, we otherwise wouldn't get.
You know, one thing that we've been doing, a few members of my team and I. So we, at this point, we're basically doing daily check-ins. They're very short, but we just need to stay, you know, in simpatico. That oftentimes it just happened by accident originally, but after the end of the call, we lingered, so everyone else got off, and there was like 3 or 4 of us on the line, and then it was like, so how are you really? You know, how is it actually going? And so now it's a little tradition. So we do that all the time. So it's very intimate, right? So because we're like stealing, it's a kind of like again, sort of a human moment. It's like a stolen informality in the context of much more, obviously, because the meetings are scheduled and whatnot. But you know, we steal these little moments at the end just to connect with one another.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So another question, as we look forward, are there any aspects of this current experience that you think have been particularly effective and impactful that you think should carry over into a post-pandemic reality?
I like the part where I get to pack my schedule the way I want to pack my schedule. You know, I like that I'm not driving in traffic or getting. I got lost on Zoom yesterday, where I was in the wrong meeting and trying to find my way, and I thought that was still a lot easier than being lost in downtown Boston. So those are the things that I hope we keep, like that sort of flexibility, the authenticity of letting, you know, people into your spaces if that's what works for you. And then, you know, kind of real comfy clothes and flat shoes. I miss them, but I don't think it's going to be an easy transition back.
You know, when I look back over this year, you know, a year ago or more, maybe more, well, certainly more than that, you know, we had been waiting for, in the education world, in the ed tech world, there's this. It has always been assumed that digital technology, you know, online media experiences will transform education, and it hasn't really, you know, up till when you think about up till about a year ago, and then, but the challenge was always that we can't get everyone to be online, right? And so now everyone is online, but we haven't really tried any of those experiments in education. It's basically been like the most obvious kinds of things to use Zoom for, and so. You know, in that sense, we haven't had the experiment, like we've done one half of the experiment, right? We can get everyone online in principle, obviously, as we've talked about. It's not, you know, it's not all kids, but we can get a lot of kids online, but now we have to go the extra mile, or not the extra mile, but just kind of complete the experiment to try out new things in an online environment, using digital games, you know, to encourage kids to learn or something. You know, Google Classrooms is good. But I mean, like it's kind of a one-to-one mapping within schooling. You know what I mean? And so I think that now that people know that we can get lots of kids online, I think that creates a context for exploring. And now what? You know, what can we do with AI and learning? You know, in this moment that we haven't tried, because we haven't tried any of that stuff really.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that, but I want to first circle over to Alex and see, yeah, any reactions.
Yeah, I mean, again, what both Kate and Nigel said, I couldn't agree more with. But I'll mention 3 things from the sort of work professional side, and then 1 thing from the personal. So professionally speaking, from a funder, nonprofit, shifts in behavior and practices, what I hope will stick are things like more and unrestricted operating support, bigger payouts, right, than the standard legal 5%. And the other one is a focus on equity, right? Like a number of funders have brought up and sort of highlighted equity, diversity, inclusion, racial equity, things like that. Those three, I'd love to see continue beyond 2021, right? I mean, forever. And then personally, I don't think I ever want to return to a 5-day a work week back in an office. Like I don't think I ever want that again. And I never thought I'd say that because I'm one of those people who loves the office environment. It's just, that's energizing, but I don't think I want it anymore because of the beauty in working from home and what that allows me to do and be.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Just one of my own, reflections recently was, and I had mentioned it to this group leading up to this, was I don't think I've actually been on like a traditional phone call with a client in the last year. It has all been through Zoom, and there has actually been something that is so much more personable about seeing their face. And so I certainly didn't expect that. But the other day when I got a voice message for the first time, I was like, what is this? But yeah, so maybe that will continue on. Nigel, I wanted to circle back on kind of your comment around kind of innovation and pushing the boundaries of what technology can do. Creative adaptations around engagement. And and I agree, I think we likely are not seeing that within the educational sector, but have the three of you experienced any really innovative, creative forms of engagement and creative technologies, whether it's in a professional setting or a more social setting, that you've thought, wow, that really has kind of pushed the bar and has created a really impactful personal experience?
I've certainly seen really interesting sort of technologies that hold potential for being game changing. I've seen add-on modules to Zoom that are doing basically facial recognition to understand mental state, right? So if a kid is sitting in the Zoom class and they're learning math or ancient history or whatever, their face reflects their mental state. And so you can actually get a sense as to, so if you're a teacher looking right at your kids and you're kind of guessing, are they, because right now the way that teachers are doing that is if a kid is looking off into the right, he or she is probably playing a game, almost anything else. They really don't have anything to go on. But if having a system that can actually infer things about their mental state, this kid is confused, right? Just by looking at them and having the system give you cues as to that, that could be a game changer, right? In so many different ways. I think there's a whole set of really interesting research that's been done on using digital games to facilitate engagement and collaboration, right? So these are, this is not quite the gamifying concept, but it is about using games as a way of like building empathy between groups of people or individuals and getting people to work on sort of having shared experiences and so on. So those things are all really potentially exciting. I really haven't seen much of it being used in the last years. It's interesting. I thought we would have seen an explosion of those things coming to the forefront, but I think because everything has been in the it's just got to work kind of frame. Like I think some of those things in mission critical situations, they've been kind of been pushed to the side to the, and it's just been like, do they have the right OS version on their computer, right? Do they have the right speed of the internet to be able to access this thing? So I think there's lots of really interesting technologies.
That technology is from one of our members, Affectiva. They're here in Boston. They're amazing. And I hear what you're saying. And I think that our companies are working very hard to get more of that adoption, right? I think we're still in a little bit of this chaotic space, kind of as you described, of like, what works? How do we get it to work? How do we get platforms where everybody can get these tools to work? Because we can make things better if we can apply these technologies to some of this work. It will support people greatly.
Mm-hmm. Alex, any reactions of really interesting, kind of creative, boundary pushing tools that you've experienced?
I mean, nothing really innovative, really creative is coming to mind. I mean, I'm thinking of a few things to just keep people, you know, engaged, but I wouldn't call them really innovative, right? They're within the Zoom platform, many of them, or they're sometimes out of it. But I wouldn't say they're really super innovative, quite frankly, based on what I just heard Nigel say. Like,
I know.
like they don't seem that innovative. I mean, that's not, I hate to be sort of they don't seem that innovative.
Well,
No, this issue around, there's so much research happening, and there has been so much interesting research done on engagement in general, and it's sitting there, right? And it hasn't really been used in this moment, as I've seen. Like, there's all this great research that shows when you can encourage young people to be part of an engagement experience, adults behave better, right? So in my context, it's about public meetings, right? In public meetings, you get a bunch of typically adults, often older, in principle, talking about engaging in a civic discourse, but it's often not civil, because people, right, they all have whatever it is that they're trying to push through. They don't want like the thing, they don't want those kind of people living in their neighborhood. But as soon as young people, and again, you could imagine using digital games to bring young people into that context, adults instantly start behaving better, right? Once kids are there, right? And so there's a whole bunch of really interesting research to draw upon to accentuate these kinds of platforms. I think like we are overusing Zoom right now, right? Zoom is, right, but it's not sufficient. I mean, it's just designed around a very kind of traditionalist, outmoded way of people discussing things. And there's all this research about other more effective modes. So I don't know how much longer we're going to be stuck doing this, but if it lasts much longer, we have to turn to some of that research and figure out how to leverage that stuff.
I want to just kind of build upon that. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
No, I was going to build on it too, honestly. I mean, I feel like there's lots of ways to be innovative too. The technology and some of the ideas that are coming along are amazing, but there are also ways to just sort of innovate in your own spaces, right? So, our team started using a Miro board, and I know that was early on, but we hadn't been doing it. So now it's new, and that's kind of fun and fresh. We also got together and had a pandemic parking lot picnic in the office parking lot, our spaces in Lexington. And that felt innovative because we hadn't really done that yet. And we could stay, it was a rainy day, but we could stay distant. And so I think there are ways to apply just sort of that innovative problem solving to whatever's in front of you to say, these are crazy times and I still want to do X. So how do we make that happen? So I think there's lots of ways to be innovative, but just to build on the thought of like, yes, there's amazing technologies, but there's also amazing creativity we can all apply.
My favorite was using, it was through Zoom. We built it on Miro, but it was a holiday swap, gift swap, which in the end, it worked out okay.
That's a great idea.
Nigel, I just wanted to kind of, again, go back to this notion of, and I guess it's slightly pivoting from kind of virtual engagement just to thinking about other adaptations of engagement. And you mentioned kind of gamification. And I mean, in many ways, you were already pioneering, the Office of New Urban Mechanics had pioneered with the 311 app. And so again, just curious to hear if you, as you've been thinking about new tools and technologies, perhaps it's less around engagement, but around data collection or the development of other tools. I don't know if that's also kind of, again, been under development over the last year.
I think that and the industry has kind of been pivoting in this direction too. I recently was talking to a journalist about changes to the smart city world, sort of big sensors in the built environment and so on. And it seems like a good idea, or a little bit scary, but also like that seems like that could work. And I think I agree, it could work. I think we have not interrogated that stuff enough. I think there's, what about privacy? What about, there's all these different things. What about, AI that, is racist? there's lots of questions that need to be asked, and I think they need to be brought from the back burner to like a side issue where there's like a scattered, set of researchers asking these questions, to front burnering all those things and say, a lot of these technologies are designed, not intended to be racist, but effectively they are, because when you have developers building technology who have no idea about whether or not this AI program can detect Black folks, right? Or how do they deal with trans people, in scanners and airport scanners, like it goes bad places. And so I think that stuff is still too niche. And I think that has to come to the forefront and say that in order to adequately use these technologies and systems, the built environment, they absolutely need to be designed to be ethical.
Right.
And not enough technologists have that as a background, and frankly, not enough universities are teaching them those skills, right? And we've been trying to lean on all the schools that we can to try to do this. But I think there's, as I was saying, I think there's potential here, but I think we need to go deeper into these issues. And so that's what so the technology, it holds a lot of promise, but there's a lot deeper that we need to go.
Yeah, great comment, Nigel. And I think, great comments from everybody, throughout the course of our conversation. But I think one thing you really highlighted for me is, the pandemic has certainly accelerated the development of some of these tools, technologies, and different engagement strategies. But there's a lot of work still to be done in terms of bridging gaps, pushing boundaries further. I'm gonna pause here now. I'm gonna hand it back over to Alicia to start to just field our broader Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, so one question, well, it's more of a comment that I received was, there are innovative ways of connecting and there are also impactful ways of connecting. And they're just two different ways to talk about connectivity. So there just might be ways that are impactful, but not necessarily innovative, impactful for people, but it allows people to feel good about the engagement that they have, with meetings or connecting with coworkers and things like that. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, or if you agree.
I think it is a useful set of axes to look at how engagement happens. And the word innovation is interesting, right? I think we all have a sense in our heads as to what that means. But is innovation the same in the public sector as it is in the private sector? Am I trying to, disrupt the market when if I'm trying to deliver services to the public? Like, what does it mean to disrupt a school? Like, what would, like, even in principle? And so I think innovation in this context, I think it bears a ton of scrutiny. Like, what does that even mean? Because I feel like innovation is so overloaded that in this way, like, this is a perfect example. It's meaningless, right? I think I would say in a social context, any innovation must be impactful, right? That's the value, right? If it's not adding value, it's just a new idea maybe. And not all new ideas are innovative, right? Sometimes they're just, like the random permutations on an old thing. That doesn't necessarily mean it's an innovation. But so I think that is the right way to interrogate these technology mediated systems.
I love that. And I think, to me, innovation is, does it, and certainly for the public sector, does it solve a problem differently, right? Is there another way to approach something, or a question, or a problem, or a challenge? So to your point, it doesn't have to be some never before heard of idea. Maybe it's just applying an old idea in a new way that solves a problem differently, But I love that also, that construct of impact, innovation. How do you measure how you're reaching people? How do you measure the support you're providing to your community, right? Like, we keep talking about these human moments, and we need to pull it back to say, is it measurable, or are we just being good people out here and trying to make sure our people are all safe and cared for?
I was sitting here thinking about, I like that sort of axis or way of thinking about it as well, innovation compared to impact. And I mean, it goes without saying, but within philanthropy and nonprofits, the word impact could mean a whole range of things. And what's impactful? How do you, going back to the measurement piece, I mean, who's deciding what's impactful? Like, is it the philanthropists or is it the folks who are being impacted by the,
Yeah.
you know, the issues or the, so it's an interesting one. I like this element of the conversation, right? Like the innovation and impact. That's a whole nother, I think, probably series of conversations if
Yeah, I think it
we
is.
go down that road. So,
And it's
Trying to get
interesting.
ourselves invited back. We've
Right.
done it a few times now.
We are totally going to do that.
that
I
was
just want to
not
hang
my.
out. I just want to hang out with you all for some other time. But you know, as we were talking about in getting ready for this conversation, like that question about what is thinking about the intersection of philanthropy and government, because we both use the word innovation, but we don't mean the same thing, right?
We
Right.
probably don't.
but that's that's a good place to have the start of a conversation, to say that we're probably having two different kinds of sort of semantics around that word, and what are we actually meaning there? Are we talking about systems change? Are we talking about, you know, sort of tactical changes? Yeah, but that's a good one.
And the word disruption, I think Nigel, you used the word disruption, but that's a whole, right? Disrupting philanthropy? Like, what does that look like?
What does that mean? Yeah.
The world would be on fire. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Not good. Not good.
Yeah, that's great. So another question I received, what are your thoughts on how our professional lives will shift once everyone gets vaccinated? So do you think people are going to be, you know, feel safe and feel eager to start connecting in person again? Do you think it's going to be more of this hybrid model up until a certain point? Like, what are your thoughts on once everyone gets vaccinated?
I'll start. I mean, we've been thinking about this a lot at Mass TLC, trying to figure out, you know, when and how and should and programs, and do you do them in person? Do you do them hybrid? Where does that begin? Where does it end? And so I think it's going to be different for everybody. I think even once people are vaccinated, everyone's going to have a different comfort levels. I think we're still going to be checking in and making sure that we are, you know, doing the right thing by the most number of people. So I think it's going to be different for everybody still for a while.
Yeah, I agree. You know, we're still not even talking about vaccinating kids yet. You know,
Right.
I mean, there's so many unknowns, and there's still a lot of people that don't want to get vaccinated, right? We're seeing, you know, a lot of Black and brown folks, for a variety of different issues, are being vaccinated at, you know, reduced numbers compared to sort of their white colleagues. And so there's things to unpack there. And, you know, you could imagine that there are pockets of sick people with this disease that persist for a long time. Who knows? You know, I think this is where, you know, like sociology and sociological thinking, you know, intersects with public health in a complex way. And yeah, who knows?
I think, Alex, you kind of mentioned it. You know, you said, you know, that you hope that you aren't going back into the office 5 days a week. I think in many ways that this period has prompted kind of a great reset. And you know, for those at Sasaki who are traveling so frequently, I hope that, again, there is this reset for us to really think critically. Do we have to travel for every single meeting, or just some? You know, I think that it is going to, it's certainly prompting those questions.
And also, I mean, the issue of, you know, sort of the socioeconomics of that situation, right? So some of our jobs can be remote for the foreseeable future, but a lot of folks' jobs can't. And so, you know, so imagining like the tiering of society in this way, you know, people who are able via the kind of jobs they get and the pay they have, are able to stay remote in some significant way, whereas other people are not. And those are the same people that are being vaccinated at lower rates. It's a complicated situation.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question, and then any questions we didn't get to, we'll make sure we can share, you know, with you guys afterward, and you can hopefully address them then. But what parallels are you seeing between your professional, you know, the needs of your professional world, and then those with, you know, in your families too? Like, are there parallels there between the needs of those groups?
There certainly are for me. I mean, you know, at work, I have a small team, 9 people, and I see clear differences on personality type and mental health in this moment, right? So I have some very kind of introverted, kind of coding type of people on the team are doing fine. You know, they're happy to not have us talking around them. But for, you know, we also have lots of designers on the team, and they're very touchy-feely. You know, that's right. It's part of the territory, and so they thrive in interpersonal kind of situation, and they're suffering right now because of this. And I see the same thing in my kids. You know, I mean, I have 3 kids in school, and it's the same kind of thing. That, you know, one of them, you know, is more introverted, and he's finding it harder. It's the same kind of issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I mean, I think I live in a suburban community not far from downtown, but we're able to do fire pits and things and get together outside. So I have a couple of groups of friends that we've continued to do that even through the winter. We shoveled all the snow last weekend to get people together, which was crazy. And we see similar kinds of things. And I hear from the team that they're doing, you know, stuff like that too. And I check in with people, kind of just like you said, Nigel, of, you know, different, how are people getting out? How are they feeling connected to their communities with us and outside too, right? Like not just here. No, I do agree. I think there are tons of parallels.
Yeah, I agree. What's been hard, I think, at least for me, and perhaps it's for others as well, is the fact that my work life and my personal life in many ways are just one big thing. And yes, I like integration and I like bringing my full self to my job, but quite frankly, my house is no longer in some ways a refuge, right? It's a work place, like it's a workplace, and that is not ideally what I want my home to be. So it's tricky. I've done it and I'm doing it, but it's sometimes I don't want it to mesh the two together all the time like that.
And that becomes a mental
You
health
know?
thing.
I'm with you on that, Alex. I find myself, you know, I work generally out of our dining room table, and every day I pack everything up, I put it in my backpack, I put it away, because I need kind of that mental space that, okay, we've now transitioned and I'm at home, and having that distinction is really important.
That's a smart way to do it, Caitlin. Pack up, unpack, pack a lunch. I should pack a lunch.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much for this conversation. It's been so enlightening, and I'm actually going to kick it over to Alexandra to close this out.
Thank you all. This was just fantastic. You all have such wonderful perspectives, and we're looking forward to sort of pushing this out, if you will, to share with others who couldn't join us this evening. It just really very thoughtful conversation. We're grateful to all of you for supporting the foundation and working with us. We love partnerships at the foundation, and this is just really great. Really, really appreciate it. And I think I do like the pack it up idea when work is done. My tactic is to go try to get out for a walk. When my workday completes, I go out for a walk, just kind of like start breathing again, that I'm on my own time. And I think we're finding all kinds of things that we can carry forward that are positive from this very bizarre time, very surreal time. But very grateful to all of you, and look forward to continuing when we actually can get together in person. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Guys,
Stay
have a good
safe.
night.
Bye-bye.